Hello, you beautiful manifesting souls, and welcome to this space and time. My name is Gabriel Lugo, and here I talk from self to self. I'm continuing today with the reading of the channeling of 2021 in October 6th, where the question that was formulated was about the nature of manifestation, thoughts becoming things. And in the first part, I explored the beginning of the channeling, where they kind of give the foundation of how reality works in terms of our thoughts and what's the underlying connection that exists between thoughts and things or situations, relationships, people, etc. And so I'm going to continue today with the channeling as it goes to Austin. In the beginning, it started with Jim, and here we're going to continue with Austin. This is one of those channelings where they sort of passed along between each other the channeling effort, and this happens a lot in the Confederation's channeling, so not so different here. And I just love it because it started with Jim, next is Austin, then is Trish, which is Gary's wife, if I remember correctly, and then there is Gary at the end. So we're going to continue with Austin and Quo says as they continue to explain the nature of manifestation. And I will do as before, I'll just go paragraph by paragraph and keep adding my views on all of this, because it can be a little bit difficult to understand. So I will just lay my views on how this works. So Austin is channeling now, and Quo says, "We are known to you as those of Quo, and we are now with this instrument. The question posed this evening focuses on the changing nature of this dynamic between thoughts and things. We feel it is important to reinforce the nature of this question as arising more from the standpoint of the third density. The notion that thoughts become things is one intended to catalyze the third density individual to examine the nature of their thoughts and how they relate to those things that seem to manifest about one and within the creation of third density." Now, they're going to talk more about the nature of how there is this idea. You see, let me put it this way. We seem to see an association between our thoughts and those things that are manifested. And so we think that there is a sort of link there, and we call it the law of manifestation and the law of attraction and all of this. So it's important to know what is really happening and how do we explore this in a mechanistic way. So this is what they're going to talk about here. Now, the first thing that you can notice in this paragraph is that they say that it's important to reinforce that the nature of this question is coming from the standpoint of third density. You will see why. So as we go to read the other paragraph, it'll stand out. And I'll make my emphasis, of course. But they also say that the notion that thoughts become things is one intended to catalyze the third density individual to examine the nature of thoughts and how they relate to other things that seem to manifest around one. This is synchronicities. See, synchronicities are part of this weird relationship between our thoughts and the things that happen. There seems to be no connection there. You know, you're suddenly thinking about someone and they text you, or you have a dream about coffee and you don't drink coffee. You don't even have coffee in your house, and you haven't thought about coffee in a long time because you haven't dealt with people who drink coffee, and I don't know, something just comes out of nowhere, maybe in your phone there's coffee. You never search coffee. So things like this, these are synchronicities that show the relationship between thoughts, visions, dreams, and so on with reality. So what's going on here? First, we have to know that it's coming from our third density mind. Now, they continue saying, this is an important aspect of this query, the fact that it's coming from third density minds. For such a question arises only when the true nature of reality is hidden by the veil of forgetting, and the underlying connection between one individual's thoughts and those things that may be manifest from those thoughts is hidden. In order to examine this mysterious dynamic, one may, in meditation, find the silence of the mind and begin to question the nature of the self that seems to produce thoughts. In this examination of self, it helps to begin with the notion that the self is but an illusion, and the distinction between self and other self, and between the creation about the self, is on the most fundamental level of creation, the product of this illusion. And especially within the third density, the product of the veil of forgetting. Yet this illusion is truly important for the evolution and the experience of the Creator. For without the ability of the Creator to conceptualize itself as individual parts, or rather individual parts, and for those parts to adopt an identity that is separate from their origin within the Creator, it would not be possible for the Creator to have any experience at all. So this is laying the foundation as to why this is arising in third density, is because what's arising is the question of how there is a relationship between thoughts and manifested things, situations, relationships, people, so on. So that's the question. How is this happening? These synchronicities and other things that are seemingly manifesting out of our own minds. This question is because we think in third density that there is a separation, that there is a distance between self and other selves and the creation around us. You see, we think that we are a self, and here they're saying that one of the things that we should do in meditation is to question the notion that we are somebody. When they say that the self is an illusion, they're telling us straight up that we, in our thinking that we are somebody, that we are this persona, is an illusion. A useful illusion, yes. You create this character, you live through this character so you can have experiences. This is what they're saying at the end. This illusion is important for the evolution and the experience of the Creator, because without the ability to conceptualize the Creator, to be able to conceptualize itself as an individual part, then we wouldn't be able to have an identity and we wouldn't have experiences at all. So infinity must collapse itself into a finite being, being able to experience itself. You see, we need to chop infinity into numbers, enable for us to be able to count and have separate things. But infinity holds all of them. So this is a key distinction that we have to make when understanding the illusion of third density, where we seem to have a mind separate from matter, and everything that happens in our minds is not related to the things that are happening. That would be just some coincidence. That's what we call them. Oh, it was just a coincidence. But in this analysis, we start to see that if the self is not present, if there is no self, then what you see is the product of a happening. the product of an ecosystem, an interrelationship, where mind is no different than matter. And so we start to see this as the ways in which everything is interconnected. Because if you think you're a self, that you're an individual thing that is not related to the environment, then you're bound to believe that yes, there is a separate existence of the mind and of matter, but everything is connected. So they continue saying, and so we suggest beginning by examining the illusion of the self and the utility of the ability of the creator to identify itself as separate selves, and then begin to question the nature of thoughts as they occur to the self. For if the self is essentially illusory, then from where do the thoughts that occur to the self come? Are these thoughts generated by the self? Or is the relationship between the illusory self and the thought that is realized by the self deeper and more connected to the creation about the self? This may seem like a rather difficult endeavor to understand, and as we speak about it with clumsy language and through an imperfect instrument, it may be difficult to conceive that the nature of the self and the nature of thoughts are vastly different than you regularly experience in your day-to-day life. But we encourage you to attempt to release the identity of the self and begin to consider that if the self does not generate those thoughts that occur to it, then those thoughts have their origin from outside of the self. So there's a lot of selfing going on here. So let's clarify a couple of things. First, if we go to the Hindu mythology, which quite beautifully explains that the only thing that exists is the self, then that gives us the hint as to why we consider ourselves to be individual selves, because we have an identity. Now, we wrongly assume that the identity of ourselves is the activity of what is happening. And because we are so deeply interconnected with the activity of what's happening around us, we attribute the identity of ourselves to that happening. In other words, to the body that is happening around you, to the thoughts that are happening around you, and most importantly, all the memories that you have about what has happened so far in your life. So you identify with all of this. You see, I have said in my videos that the ego is the result of our ever desire to identify ourselves. It's a wrong identity. Just like somebody may identify themselves to be, an animal or another person. You see, you extrapolate your sense of self to something else. And so that is the self. The self is just the ever-present awareness or self-awareness, but wrongly directed to the inappropriate activities. So that is the true self. But they're talking about the illusory self, and so they go back and forth between, are those thoughts occurring to the self, or are they happening to the self? So who's generating those thoughts? Well, if you see the creation as something that is simply a happening, and that your thoughts are part of that happening, then you realize that there is no disconnection between what is happening and your thoughts. You are not generating the thoughts. You, the separate self, are not generating the thoughts. The thoughts are occurring to you. Now, of course, depending on the focus that you have in your creation, meaning that depending on where you direct your attention to, then those thoughts will be generated by that specific frequency. So if you're caught in certain dilemmas of life and certain philosophies and certain views of the universe, then you will be caught manifesting that. You see, wherever attention goes, energy follows. Your attention is what dictates the forming, the molding of the energy that you are, or that flows. Let me not get into false identities again. You're not energy. Energy flows through the self, the ever-present self, not you as an ego self, a separate self. So we have to question this. We have to understand it. This is why it is so important to get to know who you truly are. What is the self? How can I become the creator? What is the creator within me? And of course, this is what fascinates me. And this is the core of my day-to-day musings and my reflections, and my view of life is just based on this true presence of the one creator within you. So they continue explaining that we have to, it may be difficult for us to fully understand this, but I don't find it difficult at all anymore, because it's just a matter of playing with our own experience to reveal the full identity of ourselves, which is not enclosed in a body, it's not generated by a mind, and is the same basis for everything else. It's pure awareness, you see? So we have to play with words in order to depict this reality to others. And I love it. I simply love it. So as we continue to question ourselves and see, well, I'm not a separate self. I'm not this mind. I'm not this body. Things are just happening. Where is my attention going? Because the closest thing I can say about an individual self is attention. Attention is a narrowing of infinite awareness into what you call you, the aperture of the universe that is you. And so that attention will follow, of course, whatever is interested in. And so the manifestation will be that. You see, if we get into the analogy that I use of the room, the dark room, in which you have a flashlight, and you are beaming this flash of light to different parts of the room, that is your attention. Your attention is going there. And you see, because everything is dark, the only thing that would seem to manifest is what you're shining light to. And of course, the whole universe is ready for you to beam your light at that. So whatever you direct your attention to, you're manifesting that. Now, we would hope that this is just conscious attention, but this is also guided by subconscious attention, which is where we naturally gravitate to direct our attention to. Now, I won't get into programming subconscious and all of that, because that's just part of a larger work, but you get the meaning. It's all about directing your attention to where you want the manifestation. You know, it's where did you want to shine the light of your flashlight? And you see, there's nothing esoteric about that. It's a very simple view of the world. Where do you direct your attention? Now, I'll continue reading. I'll read 2 paragraphs because this one is kind of short. They say, the notion that thoughts become a thing implies a causal link in a progression that first a thought is conceived by the self and subsequently a thing is formed from that thought. But when you remove the barrier between the self and the creation, then the causal link may appear to be much less linear. The experience within the third density of having a thought may seem to be abstract, and when the thought then unfolds into reality, it appears as though the thought preceded the action, or the creation rather. Yet since the self and the creation are indeed not separate, we ask you to consider that perhaps these two seemingly separate things are further linked, or more intrinsically linked then they appear to the third density self. And that thing that was born from the thought may not have actually been born from the thought, but the thought simply preceded the inevitable existence of the thing. Wow, so many things here that could be picked apart. But first, one clear distinction that we need to make here is when they say it seems to be linked to okay, whatever they say third density self. That's the illusory self. Okay, that is the perception that you are separate from everything else. And that's why they say, as I read it again, since the self and the creation are indeed not separate. Okay, the creation is everything that there is, and the self is that which experiences it. So it's another way of saying the creator experiencing itself. So since it's not separate, they ask us to consider that perhaps these two seemingly separated things are further linked, meaning the creation and the self. It's not that they're further linked. You know, they are one and the same, but they're talking to our human minds that believe that things are separate. And they say, or more intrinsically linked than they appear to the third density self. So this is all catering to our human mind of, I don't get how things are separate. Now, of course, when you go into the inner teachings of the reality of your experience, because really these inner teachings are just simply the investigation of the self, you find that you and the creation are one and the same. So there is no need to even say I. The I is a portal into existence, into standing out. That's what existing means. You stand out. So when there is no I, there's only self. And self includes everything that you're perceiving. So that's another thing to consider in the dynamics of manifestation. So you can see how ridiculous at this point sounds that you can use you, the separate self, can use the law of manifestation to your own advantage. That is the ego saying, oh boy, I got the hang of things and I can now manifest everything I want. See, born out of desire, as opposed to, yay, I am manifesting all of this. You see, that is manifestation from abundance, if I can even call it that, because abundance implies scarcity. And at this point, you have no idea of abundance, scarcity, separate, united, none of that. So they continue saying, when taking this view and perspective of the self and thoughts that can be quite difficult to grasp from a third density perspective, one may understand how, as the fourth density approaches upon your planet, this dynamic between the existence of thoughts and the creation of things becomes much more apparent to the self, and the notion that thoughts become things become less valid only in that there is a deeper understanding that they are not separate. You see, this sums it up beautifully, that as you become more aware of fourth density is just the removing of the veil. You see, that's the key part here. So as you become more aware of this, you see that what you're manifesting is exactly what's being in your mind. So your subconscious is, in a way, becoming more visible as you go upon this journey. And this is what we talked about in the first part of this series on manifestation. We explored that as you become aware of your journey, what is the journey? The spiritual journey, the evolution of the soul, the realization of the self. As you become more aware of this, you begin to see that what you're experiencing on a day-to-day basis is your own mind, your own subconscious. So, aren't you manifesting all the time everything that you are? Well, there are things that you may not feel good about. And the question is, why then are you manifesting it? Why is your mind focused on that? Deep healing happens here. So, they finished the last paragraph that I would read before they transfer to Kathy or Trish and say, as your planet progresses into the fourth density and your peoples progress along with your planet, you will begin to realize more and more that the thoughts that seem to be generated by the self are indeed occurring simultaneously among many individuals. And as this experience grows and the relationship between groups who partake in the same thought deepens, the social memory complex begins to form more and more efficiently to the point where thoughts become more crystallized. As more and more groups share in thought, they begin to perceive with more clarity the creation that lies before them that will unfold, not as a result of that thought, but as the path that has been perceived by that thought. So they leave us with this nice part where they show us that as the planet progresses into fourth density, we, as a collective social memory, we as this group of thinking minds within the planet, we continue to manifest what we want. This is why there is so much chaos and discrepancy in our world, because fourth density is causing this to be manifested in reality. So everything that you see that is happening in the world is part of the collective consciousness. In other words, a lot of people are manifesting the financial crisis in which we are, because that's just how our subconscious has been conditioned and programmed to be. A lot of people are manifesting and showing all the dirty stuff that is happening behind the scenes. Governments, institutions, and so on. On the other hand, a lot of people are manifesting all this love, sharing, the technology that's bringing us together more and more. More people are manifesting teachers of all kinds, in the medical industry, in the laws and regulation systems, in all of our institutions. We're manifesting these teachers who are showing the world the right way to be together. Not that there is a right way, but showing the wrong ways, rather, in which we are becoming separate. And so, as an opposite, there's more unity. So all of this is being manifested by the collective consciousness. Where you direct your attention is where things manifest. So when we say, well, a lot of people are still directing their attention to the mainstream media, right? There's a lot of people still doing that. So yeah, rightfully, the world is going to show that. Whatever the mainstream media has planned, programmed for us. Well, a lot of people are doing meditation. Well, that's being manifested too. All of it, collectively, we are becoming this social memory complex that starts to form in the early stages of fourth density, which is now. Individually, also, as the so-called person develops in its own understanding of the self, well, those things that are bound to happen, the river, the water that is supposed to flow through the channel that we call the river, then more water starts to flow. And as you allow this channel to open, and you allow this channel to become simply the way in which reality flows, then you see that your spiritual journey is not really a journey, but an observing of things that need to happen. This is where we emphasize acceptance and allowance and just permitting things to happen. You see, abandon resistance. Allow things to be guided by the higher intelligence in you, which I refuse to keep calling higher self because it still separates us. It still brings up in our visualization of it, oh, the higher self is over there and I am here. There's a separation between us and I need to reach him or her. No, it's a higher intelligence. And so the more we access this higher intelligence, or rather, the more we allow this higher intelligence to work through us, then the more that we seem to manifest those things that we wanted. It's not so. It's just that the relationship that we have with the environment and the creation around us, when we live from our true self, which is not a separate self, it's not an ego self, then things become more enjoyable. Let me put it another way. The less you resist to your true life, the more you will feel like, yes, this is my desired life. Doesn't that make sense? It does to me. Because we are simply obstructing the flow of the river with our own attention. Focus on doubts and insecurities and resentment and fear and so on. All of these emotions are there to repress the flow of life through us. So when you open yourself and say, yes, I allow all of this, and more importantly, you realize who you truly are, what you truly are, what is the basis of this reality. When you truly go into it, you come out and say, this is it. This is the meaning of life. This is my real purpose. It's just be here and now. So, with that, I come to the end of this episode. In the second half of, the second part of this reading of this channeling. Remember, you can read the whole channeling in the description. I have the link. The last thing that Quo says before channeling to Kathy, which they call Trish, is, at this time we will take leave of this instrument and transfer the contact to the one known as Trish. We are Quo. And I am Gabe, or Gabo, depending on how you want to call me. And I have nothing else to say, but thank you. And I'll catch you on the next one.